You know what nobody tells you. When a woman is genuinely drawn to an older man, when there's real, deep attraction there, she's not trying to seduce him with her looks, or her charm, or her wit. She's testing him, and there are two specific questions she'll ask, sometimes not in words, but in the way she watches for his answers. One of them can make or break everything. The other one? It reveals whether he's actually capable of the emotional maturity she's unconsciously seeking. And if he fails either one, she'll know. She'll just know. Let's talk about what those questions are, and why she's really asking them. There's a pattern that repeats across human connection, one that therapists recognize, that literature explores, that we see in relationships around us but rarely name explicitly. When a woman finds herself drawn to an older man, and I want to be clear that this isn't about age gaps themselves, but about the psychological dynamic of seeking someone with more life experience, more stability, more emotional grounding, something shifts in how she relates to him. She becomes hyper-aware. She watches differently. She asks questions that seem casual on the surface but are deeply intentional underneath. And what's important to understand is that this isn't manipulation. This isn't a woman playing games or testing a man for sport. This is something far more primal and protective. Is the part of her that's asking, is this person safe? Is this person capable of handling me? Because here's what you need to understand about women who are drawn to older men. There's usually something in their history that made them feel unseen by men their own age. Maybe they grew up in households where emotional expression wasn't valued. Maybe they were parentified early meaning. They took on adult emotional responsibilities as children, and they learned to relate to the world through a lens of caretaking and emotional intelligence. Maybe they simply developed faster, thought deeper, needed more substance. Whatever the origin, when a woman like this encounters a man who is genuinely older, who has lived more, who carries that quiet confidence that only comes from having survived things and come out the other side, something in her recognizes a possibility, not a savior, not a fantasy, but a real possibility, that here is someone who might actually see her, understand her, hold space for her without asking her to shrink herself down to make him comfortable. And so she tests him. You're not alone if you recognize this in yourself, if you've caught yourself asking seemingly simple questions while listening intently to the answer. This is what we're exploring today. The first question doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it comes as vulnerability. She'll tell you something she doesn't usually tell people, something that makes her feel exposed. She'll watch your reaction like a hawk. What she's really asking is this. When I show you the parts of me that are messy, complicated, unfeminine by traditional standards, when I tell you about my ambitions, my fears, my dark sense of humor, my past mistakes, will you still see me as worthy of love? Or will you try to fix me, reshape me, or worse, withdraw? Here's the psychology beneath this. Many women who are attracted to older men grew up in environments where their authentic self was too much. Maybe their father was emotionally distant or dismissive. Maybe he didn't know how to handle a daughter who was sensitive or who had strong opinions. Maybe the family culture was one where you performed rather than felt. What happens in a childhood like that is profound. A girl learns to monitor herself obsessively. She develops what psychologists call a false self, a version of her she presents to the world that's more palatable, more manageable, less threatening, and the parts of her that don't fit that performance, they go underground. They get repressed. They fester a little because they're denied expression. By the time she reaches adulthood, this pattern is so deep, it's invisible to her. She doesn't realize she's doing it. She just knows that when she's around certain people, especially men her own age, she feels small, constrained, like she's playing a role rather than living a life. And then she meets an older man. Maybe he's just comfortable in his own skin. Maybe he's had enough life experience to know that women are complicated, and that's not just okay, it's interesting. Maybe he doesn't need her to be small in order to feel secure in himself. So she tests him. She says something real. She shares something vulnerable. And she watches to see if his face changes. If he pulls away, if he tries to make it about himself. If he offers some pat reassurance that misses the point entirely. What she's looking for is this. Does he have the emotional capacity to just be with what she shared? Can he hold complexity without needing to resolve it? Can he validate her without fixing her? When he passes this test, when he meets her realness with presence rather than panic, something unlocks in her. It's like she's been holding her breath her whole life, and finally she can exhale. But there's a second question, and this one is even more critical. And it usually surfaces around moments of choice. She'll present you with a situation where you have to choose between what's easy and what's right, between your comfort and her needs, between the path of least resistance and the path that actually requires you to show up and be vulnerable. Sometimes it's small. She cancels plans last minute because she's having an anxiety spiral and needs someone to talk to, or she has a family crisis that requires emotional support on a timeline that's inconvenient for you. Sometimes it's bigger. Her past comes up in a way that makes the relationship more complex. She needs you to have a difficult conversation. She needs you to challenge her lovingly. She needs you to prove that your commitment to her isn't conditional on her being easy to love. What she's really asking with this test is, will you actually choose me, or will you choose me only when it's convenient? Are you here for the version of me that's put together and attractive and doesn't need much? Or are you here for me, the whole, flawed, sometimes difficult, sometimes needy version? The psychology here connects to something called earned secure attachment. This is a concept developed by attachment researchers. Basically, people develop attachment styles in childhood based on whether their caregivers were emotionally available and responsive. An anxiously attached person, often someone whose parents were inconsistently available, or who experienced emotional neglect, will unconsciously search for evidence throughout their adult relationships that they're truly safe, that they're truly chosen. A woman who's been raised by emotionally unavailable parents, and older men often attract women with this background, has a nervous system that's been calibrated to doubt. She learned young that love is conditional, that she has to earn it, that showing need makes her a burden. When she tests an older man by presenting him with a moment where she actually needs him, she's not being difficult. She's checking something critical. Is this person capable of seeing my need not as a burden, but as an invitation to demonstrate love? An emotionally mature older man will understand this instinctively. He won't make her feel guilty for having needs. He won't deliver a lecture about emotional independence. He'll show up, he'll choose her, and this is where it gets really interesting. When a woman experiences a man choosing her, not the idea of her, not the convenience of her, but actually choosing her in the messy, inconvenient moments, something shifts neurologically. Her nervous system begins to learn that maybe, finally, it's safe to trust. Maybe she doesn't have to perform all the time. Maybe she can actually relax into being loved. Now here's what you don't see, talked about often. What happens when an older man fails these tests? Some men panic at the vulnerability. They respond to authentic emotion with distance or criticism, or worse, with their own emotional dump, making her question all over again whether the relationship is actually about her being seen or about her being useful. Others say they'll choose her, but only when it's convenient. They're great when things are easy. But when she actually needs them to show up during hard times, when the relationship requires something beyond surface-level companionship, they become unavailable. And when that happens, something in her shuts down. Not dramatically, but quietly. That part of her that opened up, that let herself hope, it closes again. Not with anger usually, but with a kind of resigned sadness. The familiar feeling of, I was right to doubt. I can't trust this. She might stay in the relationship for various reasons. Comfort. Fear of being alone. Financial security. Hope that things will change. But she'll never fully open again. She'll have learned once more that the only person she can really count on is herself. Let's talk about what this pattern means across the trajectory of a woman's life, because understanding this is crucial. If a woman's formative relationships with her father, with early authority figures, were emotionally distant or conditional, something gets hardwired into her psychology. It's not something she consciously chose, it's an adaptation. The message she internalized was something like, to be loved, you must be useful. To be safe, you must be self-reliant. To matter, you must have something to offer. This becomes her template for all relationships. She grows into an adult who is often remarkably competent, often deeply empathetic because she learned to read other people's needs obsessively, and often exhausted in ways that nobody sees. By the time she's seeking connection with an older man, she's been carrying a specific burden for a very long time. The burden of believing that love is something she has to earn, not something she has to earn. Not something she inherits by simply existing, not something that's offered freely, but something that requires proving. When she enters a relationship with an older man, she's often unconsciously searching for someone who can interrupt this pattern, someone whose maturity means he's already learned what she hasn't, that genuine connection isn't transactional, that love doesn't require perfect performance, that vulnerability isn't a weakness to be managed, but a door to intimacy. The two tests she runs aren't about him ultimately. They're about her. They're the nervous system asking, is it finally safe to be fully myself? Is it finally safe to trust? These tests ripple through everything: her sexuality, her career, her friendships, her sense of self-worth. If the older man passes both tests, something profound happens. Not perfection, real relationships aren't perfect, but permission. Permission to gradually, carefully, experimentally let down the armor she's worn her entire life. If he fails, the opposite happens. She learns once more that it's not actually safe, that she's not actually lovable enough to be chosen when it's difficult. And she tightens up. She becomes more self-protective, more reliant on her own resources, more skeptical that genuine emotional intimacy is possible for someone like her. The impact of this extends into every area of her life. How she shows up at work, how she navigates friendships, how she treats her own emotional needs, usually with the same dismissal and self-reliance that's been modeled to her. If you're reading yourself in this script, if you recognize yourself as the woman who tests, or if you're the man who's been tested and didn't know what was happening, I want you to know something. Understanding this is not about blame. It's not about deciding that your parents failed you, or that the men in your life haven't been good enough. It's about compassion. Compassion for the child you were who learned to survive in the world the only way she knew how. And compassion for the adult you've become, who's still sometimes operating from that survival blueprint. The path forward begins here, in this awareness. When you can recognize the pattern, when you can see the test for what it actually is, an unconscious search for safety rather than a game, something shifts. You begin to have choice. For women, you start to notice when you're testing someone, and you can ask yourself, is this actually about him? Or is this about what I learned about love early on? Can I communicate my needs directly instead of testing for them? Am I actually safe now? Or am I still protecting myself as if I'm still that child? For men, you can learn to recognize these moments, not as ultimatums or demands, but as profound invitations to show up, to be present, to demonstrate that yes, you see her. Yes, you choose her. Yes, you choose her. Yes, even when it's difficult. And for everyone, shadow work around early attachment, inner child healing, reparenting yourself with the compassion nobody gave you. These aren't buzzwords, they're actual paths toward freedom. The healing happens slowly, non-linearly, and it requires patience with yourself. But it begins with understanding, with naming the pattern, with seeing yourself, finally, with the same compassion you've always shown everyone else. You're not broken, you're not too much, you're just someone who learned to survive, and now you're learning to live.